Hello everyone, thank you for watching this video covering one of the Modern Horizons 3 Commander Precon decks. This section of video is taken from our podcast episode, which you can find a link to in the description down below for the full playlist, plus all the other videos that we do here on our channel. Thank you again for watching, and have a wonderful day.
Let's dive in. So the commander for this deck is Ulalek, the Fused Atrocity, and you can pay 5 waste/Wooburg hybrid mana, and that's white, blue, black, red, green. That's all the colors. Or you can play just 5 colorless for this. Legendary creature Eldrazi, 2/5. Has Devoid, so the card itself has no color, even though you can technically pay colored mana to cast it. Mm-hmm. Camera just nodded at me for some reason. I was agreeing. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you may pay 2 colorless mana. If you do, copy all spells you control, then copy all other activated and triggered abilities you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. For the copies. That's very powerful. Very, very strong. So basically, if you pay 2 additional mana, you can just, if you're casting an Eldrazi, you just get another one. That's pretty insane. Mm-hmm. And then any triggered ability that you have that's doubling up stuff, that happens twice as well. So very, very good.
It's worded that way in such a way because traditional Eldrazi cards, they all do their strong and most powerful things, but they all are on cast triggers. So normally making token copies of them doesn't do anything.
So this is a way to get around that.
Yeah. So, like, if you were casting a card like Artisan of Kozilek, as an example, if you had 2 extra colorless sitting around, you would make a second Artisan of Kozilek, and then you would copy any triggers that are currently on the stack, which would be the original Artisan's cast trigger.
That is so cool, because then they resolve and hit the battlefield, and then you get the cast trigger. That's really sick. I love that little workaround they made. As Lask, the Swelling Scourge, it's 3 mana. Notably, the cheapest Eldrazi I've ever seen, I think, as far as mana goes. It's a 2/2. Whenever Azlask, the Swelling Scourge, or another colorless creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. And then you can pay Wooburg. Creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. Scions and spawns you control gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn, which is so crazy. For those of you who don't know what Annihilator does, when you attack with a creature that has Annihilator on it, whoever you're attacking that creature with has to sack that many is it non-lands or just permanents?
Permanents.
It's
you
gross.
get lands with the Annihilator, baby.
It's gross. So, yeah. If you attack someone with like 5 creatures that all have Annihilator 1, they have to sack 5 permanents before blocks are even declared. That just happens. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes you're getting through. Very strong. I think I would actually play this as the commander and then put Ulalek in the 99 because it's great. But
yeah, Ulalek can be slightly harder to cast, though, even though it has all that. Like, this deck is obviously utilized and built around the idea of you're going to need colorless and colored all the time. So you should be able to get both of these on curve. But obviously, Azlask with being just 3 instead of some weird hybrid whatever.
Yeah. Also, I'll go ahead and note here for the way I kind of thought about this deck in regards to cuts and upgrades. Really, like the notable aspect of this deck versus other Eldrazi builds I've seen is that it is really focusing on like the Eldrazi spawn and making tokens and then doing something with those tokens to win, which is different than other Eldrazi decks because normally they're just trying to ramp into like the big boys like Kozilek or stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just this deck is very obviously kind of trying to do a slightly different strategy, and I think Azlask actually supports that a lot better than Ulalek does.
Well, certainly the coolest thing you could do with those spawns and scions is the Angelic Aberration. That thing is nutty.
Oh, yeah. So that, yeah, I don't know why I didn't immediately think of this. So this is another new card, Angelic Aberration. It's 5 and a white for an Eldrazi Angel. 4/4. Devoid. Flying, Vigilance. Already great. When Angelic Aberration enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of creatures each with base power or toughness of 1 or less. So notably, this only works with like Eldrazi Spawn and Scions that you're making. Then it says create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi Angel tokens with flying and vigilance. So you're turning all of your weak, tiny tokens that are really just there for chump blocking into actual threats in the sky. So this is a win con in this deck if you have enough of a board state to do it. Very strong, really, really good card. This one's not new, but Sire of Stagnation is really, really crazy. Very intense stacks piece, honestly. So it's 4 blue black for a 5/7 Eldrazi with Devoid. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and then you draw 2 cards. So they get punished for playing lands. That's brutal.
I love Sire Stagnation. It's one of my favorites.
Very brutal stacks piece there.
Dax. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's rough. You're just making them exile their stuff, and they just can't get it. They literally won't ever get to cast that stuff. Glaring Fleshraker. It's 2 and a waste, or 2 and a colorless mana specifically. Whenever you cast a colorless, so it's also a 2/2 Eldrazi drone. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, you create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature. Add 1 colorless mana. And then, whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, Glaring Fleshraker deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is sneakily one of the best cards in the whole deck, because every time you cast basically anything, because most of the cards in here that have color in them are devoid, so they technically count as colorless. So you're making an Eldrazi spawn, which can act as a mana dork for you, and it also deals damage every single time to your opponents, which is really strong. And the last card I'll talk about before we get into some reprints and some upgrades and stuff is Eldrazi Displacer. This is a reprint as well, but this card is really, really cool. And there's a very cool synergy with an upgrade that I have later that I want to mention. So this is also Devoid. It's 2/1 for a 3/3 Eldrazi, or a 2 and a white for a 3/3 Eldrazi. I don't know where 2/1 came from, but my brain. So then it says you can pay 2, exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So if you have any ETBs you want to double up on, you can just do that with Eldrazi Displacer. This is kind of the Displacer kitten of this deck, and you guys know that I love that kind of effect. I think it's very fun and very cool.
I was skimming the creatures up and down to see if the cowards put in here the specific drone that goes infinite with Displacer, and they did not.
Oh, is there a drone that which one is it?
There's a Devoid green one that generates 3 spawns. Scions. It makes 3 Scions on ETB, and it can then sack those 3 Scions into Displacer to then blink itself in, out, and like it doesn't get you anywhere, but you have this Eldrazi that goes up and down, and you have sacrifice and blink and whatever. It would go infinite with the Fleshraker, right? All those spawns would come in, you'd ping everybody dead. So
is it the Brood Monitor that you're thinking of?
Brood Monitor, that's it.
Okay, that's actually the combo that I threw in there. I was like,
there it is. Yeah, so yeah, Brood Monitor and the Displacer, then you throw the Fleshraker in there. Now you actually have an out.
You have a win con right there.
There you go.
We'll retouch on that when we get to the upgrades and stuff. But very cool stuff there. I'm not so familiar with Eldrazi, so I don't know what like good reprints are. Morifon the Boundless is a good reprint just because it's an expensive card. As far as like cards that need to be in this deck, I don't think it needs to be in this specific build of an Eldrazi deck, but there's definitely Eldrazi decks that it does benefit from being in there.
It's super nice. It's super nice in here because like these Eldrazi that have the Devoid but do require color to still cast them, Morifon allows you to take that colored aspect away from it. You can now start casting all of these colored spells just with colorless.
Yes. And that's what's really cool. Sifter's Skulls is a great reprint. So it's 3 and a black for a 4/3 Eldrazi with Devoid. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion token, and it has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless mana. So there's lots and lots of ways in this deck to make scions or spawns that then you can sacrifice to net yourself a mana, which is super important. All Is Dust is pretty insane. It's kind of iconic for what it does. It's one of the only... it is the only colorless board wipe, I believe. So it's 7.
No, there were those couple that was in the Eldrazi Unbound deck.
That's correct.
From Commander Masters.
This is the OG, though. This is the one that everything tries to be. So 7 mana for Kindred Sorcery. Each player sacrifices all permanents they control that are 1 or more colors. So this doesn't hit your stuff because it's all colorless, and it gets around all of the indestructible hexproof nonsense that anyone else could have because it just makes them sacrifice their things. The only way for someone to have an out to this card is to have a card on their board that says your opponents cannot make you sacrifice permanents or something. And I know there's some cards that do that, but their
creature is already colorless.
Yeah, so they would have to have colorless creatures in order to not get destroyed by this, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah. Well, this is in a cycle of 4 where one of them is a deck that can generate servo tokens.
That's true. Yeah. I don't know. I still think All Is Dust is probably hitting the important part, and
it's hitting most everything. Yep.
If you All Is Dust and you're left with a board of Eldrazi's and they're left with a board of servo tokens, I know how that's going to go.
Annihilator.
Man, honestly, yeah, this deck is great as far as reprints go. How about
Eldrazi Monument in the artifacts? The thing is wacky. Have you seen that one before?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. This is kind of a win con here. It doesn't but it's 5 mana for an artifact that gives all of your creatures +1/+1 flying and indestructible. So yeah, you could just send a 10/10 flying indestructible creature at your opponents. That's totally fair thing to do. And the downside is at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. If you can't, you sacrifice the Eldrazi Monument, but you're hopefully making enough scions and spawns.
I was going to say, sacrifice 1 creature.
Ooh. Yeah. So this is another reason to kind of build into the token strategy of this deck instead of going for just like the biggest Eldrazi that you can. Most of the other artifacts in this deck are mainly just there to produce mana. You've got a Herald's Horn in here, so that reduces your spells by 1 more. So that's great, especially if you have the Ugin out. So now you can reduce the cost of stuff by 3. Idol of Oblivion's in here, which is really cool. 2 mana for an artifact that says tap, draw a card. Activate only if you created a token this turn. Hopefully you did. And then it says pay 8 and tap this to sack it and just make a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. So just
we did it. The Eldrazi creator finally made its way into an Eldrazi deck.
We did it.
Yeah. Poor Idol of Oblivion has been printed in so many token precons, but has never been in an Eldrazi deck. We made it home, boys.
That is so funny. It's so random. Before we get into the actual like upgrades and cuts that I have for this deck, I just want to point out that Rishkar's expertise is not that amazing in this deck, because the second half where you may cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its cost is not great here, because what are Eldrazi's if not expensive? So 5 CMC, like that's just not good enough. This should, in my opinion, this should just be a last march of the Ents and just call it. That it's just a better card that does almost exactly the same type of thing here. And you get to put all of the Eldrazi's in your hand on the field instead of just one that's less than 5. So just swap that for that. And now, without further ado, we can get into some of the cuts and upgrades I've got planned. Unfortunately, Roaming Throne is a great upgrade for this deck because it's a great upgrade for almost anything. But specifically here, because you are really leaning heavily into colorless things. And then how you can pick a type, you can pick Eldrazi. And then it doubles up all your triggers. So Yeah, I hate recommending Roaming Throne, but I would be remiss if I did not for this deck. That would be a little silly of me.
Do you want to Sire of Stagnation twice? Add a Roaming Throne.
That's how you just never get invited back to the table, or your friends are like, you can't play that deck anymore. But it is a good upgrade. Another great upgrade is Smothering Abomination. This card is really cool. I played in Shire, but here it's even better, honestly. So it's two colorless black for an Eldrazi 4/3. It has Devoid and Flying, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice a creature. That's not a real problem though, because the second half of the ability says whenever you sacrifice a creature, you draw a card. So hopefully you're sacrificing your servos. And if you had this out on the field when you were doing that loop, you would also get to draw your entire deck if you wanted to. But it's also just amazing card advantage. This card is really, really good, and it performs very well every time that I've had it on the board, and it's not even in a deck that's like this. Yeah, great card. Vela the Nightclad. It's 4 blue black for a legendary creature, human wizard, 4/4, with Intimidate. So it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share color with it. And then other creatures you control have Intimidate, which is insane because you put that on your Eldrazi's and now people can't block your Eldrazi's, which is horrifying for them. The last part, whenever Vela the Nightclad or another creature you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So whenever you sack your Scions or your Spawns to get mana, if you have this on the board, all that deals 1 damage to your opponents, which is awesome. So just more upside to what you're already doing. And then my last upgrade here is Wandering Archaic. It's a colorless spell. It's not an Eldrazi, but it kind of looks like one. So on the front side of this card, it's 5 mana for a creature avatar 4/4 that says whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2 mana. If they don't, you may copy the spell. So this is a pseudo stacks piece. This basically prevents people from playing removal a lot of the time, because if they go to remove your thing and they don't pay the extra 2 mana, you just remove something of theirs and it's free for you. So they just 2-for-1 themselves, essentially, which is really bad. The back side of this card is Explore the Wastelands. So it's 3 mana to cast this sorcery side of this card. It says each player looks at the top 5 cards of their library, reveals a land card and or an instant or sorcery card from among them, then puts that card they revealed this way into their hand and the rest on the bottom of their library. And then each player gains 3 life. No one's really casting that half of this card, but Wandering Archaic itself is great. So I recommend playing it here. Let's make room for some of these cards, because I just recommended 5 cards, not counting the Rishkar's Expertise versus Last March of the Ants. The Elder Deep Fiend, it's an 8 mana Eldrazi Octopus. That's a 5/6. It does have Flash, and it also has a Emerge 5 blue. So it says you may cast the spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the Emerge cost, reduced by that creature's converted mana cost. When you cast a spell, tap up to 4 target permanents. To be honest, not that good. Like, there's just better things you can do for 8 mana or whatever the Emerge cost is. Like, this is just not that great of a card. So play something else. The next cut here is Inversion Behemoth. It's 2 colorless for the 2/9. This is the 2/9 you're talking about. At the beginning of combat on your turn, switch the power and toughness of each of any number of target creatures until end of turn. So this one is tricky. Like, cut this at your own discretion. I just don't like. It's a little gimmicky in this deck. If this was in like a walls deck that you're turning your walls into like attacking creatures, I could see it a little bit better.
Oh, that'd be really bad in walls, because then if you're switching their power and toughnesses, you're gonna kill them by turning them into 15 zeros or 7 zeros.
That's fair.
You know what I mean?
I just don't love this here. I think it's a little bit like it's a nothing burger. It does a little bit of nothing here. And
it also kind of looks like a nothing burger.
Yeah, the cool part is that you can switch the power and toughness of your opponent's creatures. So if your opponents have a bunch of like 0/1 tokens, you just make them all 1/0s and they die, which is sick. But it's a little bit of a like, you're hoping that scenario is happening in order for this card to be good. Like, there's just too many unknowns to playing this card that to say that it's good or worth playing it here. And in a deck where like at the 4 CMC slot should probably be ramp to get your bigger Eldrazi's, it's just not worth it. And then my last two cuts are Suffer the Past. It's X and a black for an instant. Exile X target cards from target player's graveyard. For each card exiled this way, that player loses 1 life and you gain a life. This card is fine. It's just like, it doesn't need to be here. Like, there's just no real reason to play it in this deck.
It's kind of a random one in here.
It literally is like they picked just a random card out of all of the cards in Magic and just threw it in as the 99th card, and that's what this was.
Quick, we need a card that exiles a graveyard. Suffer the Past.
Yeah, it felt completely random, and that's why we're cutting it. And then my last cut here is Warping Whale. So it's 2 colorless, but it's 1 and then a specific colorless. So it says choose 1. Exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. And then counter target sorcery spell. So you can only counter sorceries. You can only exile creatures with power toughness 1 or less. So 1, because it has less than 1, it's dead. So it's not on the field anyway. And then put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi sign creature token onto the battlefield. So those are the 3 modes. You can only pick 1, and none of them are good enough to warrant playing this card. So cut it.
You don't want to exile Birds of Paradise?
I mean, Bolt the Bird, Warping Whale the Bird, but there's better options here if you feel the need.
Bolt the Bird, Whale the Quail.
You do. We have to keep in mind that even though this is an Eldrazi deck, this is a 5-color Eldrazi deck. So you don't have to play bad cards like Warping Whale. Like, you can play good removal spells, and
yeah,
it could just be a lightning bolt instead, and it would accomplish the exact same goal. So
what I do like with this deck is that it does juggle the balance decently well of having colorless matter cards, while also making sure that you've got the colored mana you need to cast some of these things that have the colored mana pips in their costs. I really like that about this deck a lot.
It's definitely like that's a challenge in deck building. So I think they did a good job. Excuse me, with this deck in regards to that. I do want to say, notably, I didn't include any of the Eldrazi Titans as upgrades because those are like, it's kind of just like whatever you feel like playing. They would all be great, but I don't need to tell you that. It's an Eldrazi deck. You can figure that out.
Yeah, Eldrazi is not complicated to figure out. You're either doing the thing that generates lots of the little like spawn scion tokens, and you're generating and reaching up to casting like those titans or whatever, or you're doing something combo-y or something stupid like with the displacer.
Exactly. So in this upgrade, I leaned into tokens, comboing with displacer, and winning that way, or turning your tokens into value and winning some other way, because we've all seen other Eldrazi decks that just slam the big boys and win that way. But this is new and different. So we're trying to be new and different. John, what are your thoughts?
As a whole, or just on the Eldrazi deck in general? Because I made my statement there is like, yeah, there's like it is certainly Eldrazi. It is the second Eldrazi this year. So
yeah,
it's Eldrazi. I suppose like, as compared, the real one to talk about, I suppose, when talking about a deck like this is why would you buy this over Eldrazi Unbound from Commander Masters last year? Let's throw price out the window just for a minute here. Like, let's say hypothetically you've got access to both. What would be your determining factors of this over that one specifically? If you really liked what I'm noticing about this deck is that they really leans kind of into like, hey, remember this really cool thing from those years ago that you liked and enjoyed? This really screams out to me that like, hey, were you a big enjoyer from Battle for Zendikar block that had the colored pip Eldrazi's that were able to pull off and do like colored mana things while still utilizing and playing a colorless matter style thing? I think this one would be the deck that you grab over finding Eldrazi Unbound, the specific colorless one. There's not to say that you can't grab both and kind of like smush them together, right? Like Zuladoc is nutty in here, right? Like all of these Eldrazi, because they're devoid, you just get cascades off of them if you throw Zuladoc in here.
Right. Zuladoc is obvious. Good here.
It's harder to do the other way backwards, right? Because like even though the cards that have colored manas in them, even though they say that they are devoid, you still have to follow color identity things. So all of these new cool colored pip devoid Eldrazi's, you can't throw them backwards into Zuladoc, but you can bring Zuladoc's deck forward if you so want.
Truth. Yeah. I think I like this deck more just because it kind of lends itself to a more variable play structure because it allows for colors, and that's new. Like you're not typically able to do that with Eldrazi because the only Eldrazi we have had were all colorless that were legendary at least. So, this is a new way. This is a new take on an old popular thing in Magic, and I think that's cool.
Yep.
And the cards, the new cards in the set seem well designed. I like that a lot. So I like this deck a lot. I think as far as Eldrazi, I've never been tempted to play Eldrazi, but I have been tempted by this deck. It is very expensive. It's like $140 pre-order on Card Kingdom, which is at least double the others, which is kind of wild, but it's Eldrazi.
Makes sense.
So
People
kind of
love Eldrazi.
They do.
Yeah.
So